Vuatov. So we are actually going to at this time have a midrash discussion about. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight this after all. Um, we're going to have a midrash discussion here about Yom Teruah. Now, there's a number of things that I want to kind of cover as kind of a foundation. And then after that, we're going to take a look at some questions. Our congregation on Slack is actually going to be posting questions and we'll be addressing them as they come. So let's start at the beginning. First of all, on its face, what is Yom Teruah? To really understand that, what we need to go ahead and do is we need to pull up or kind of have handy some Bible verses, and the ones that we're going to be looking at are specifically going to be in Leviticus and very possibly in Deuteronomy. So, contextually, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to be pulling up on my tablet the Blue Letter Bible, and I'll just go ahead and share the screen with you guys. It's a little bit clunky. I don't have my video switcher with me. This is more kind of a laid back way of having a kind of a Bible study. The reason that we are making it live is because I believe that some pretty good information is probably going to come out of this situation. So we'll start with that. So what we're going to do is I'll just go ahead and share my screen here. And this is the way we used to do this, right? I mean, there was a time when all we had was Zoom. We didn't have YouTube and we didn't have the video switcher. We didn't have any of that stuff. And we were able to do it this way. I'm going to go ahead and leave my picture in picture down there at the bottom. But we're going to jump over here to Leviticus chapter 23. And very specifically, we're going to move down to the verse that talks about Yom Teruah. Okay. So it says, Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, shall be a solemn rest to you, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall do no regular work, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahweh. Okay, so we need to unpack all of this really quick. So first and foremost, two things are very important. Speak to the children of Israel. Let's short version this. You, if you name the name of Christ, are Israel. Okay, that's done. All right, 7th month. First counting of the month is when the barley is aviv in the springtime. If it is harvestable, as soon as the new moon hits, it is time to start the counting of months. Okay. That counting of months then leads to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months. So in the 7th month of the year that is counted from the first of the barley being Aviv is the first day at sundown for the beginning of Yom Teruah. Why do we reconcile from sundown? Because of this commandment right here. Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, However, on the 10th day of the 7th month is Yom Kippur. It shall be a holy convocation to you. You shall afflict yourselves. You shall offer an offering made by fire. You shall do no manner of work in that same day, for it is Yom Kippurah, day of atonement, to make atonement for you before Yahweh. Whoever it is shall deny himself in that selfsame day whoever it is who shall not deny himself in that selfsame day shall be cut off from his people. Whoever who it is who does any manner of work in that same day shall I will destroy from his people. You shall do no manner of work. It is a statute forever throughout your generations. It shall be a Shabbat of solemn rest for you, and you shall deny yourselves in the 9th day of the month at evening. From evening to evening, you shall keep your Shabbat. Okay. Now, what you need to know is that means that everything contained within the ability for the people to stay in the land and not be exiled is based upon the Yovel, or the 50th year, or the Jubilee. Now, the Jubilee is the 50th year of 7 Shemitas, or seven-year periods. A Shemitah is a 7-year period starting at the first of the 7th month. Now, what's important about this is to know that the Yom Kippur of that 50th year, or that 49th year, begins the 50th year at Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur begins at evening. Therefore, all Jews, all Hebrews, anybody who is in honor of Torah, reconciles the day from the evening and reconciles the counting of years from the first of the 7th month. Now, the reason this is important is because that means that at the sundown of the evening before the day of the first of the 7th month is actually the beginning of the day of the first of the 7th month, which means for us, it will be actually Tuesday at sundown. I'm going to prove that to you really quick this way right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the Star Live, and I think I have the sound turned on this, so I apologize if it's noisy. Okay. Oh, that is not what I meant to do. All right. And now we go back into this. I'm going to move us over here for just a moment and go to Sky Live in my Star Walk 2. And I'm going to show you that today is the 1% waning crescent. Now, there's one thing that is very, very important about this, and that is that it's not until tomorrow that we actually have the new moon. But the waxing crescent is the first actual crescent. It's not visible because it's a 1%er. The next one down is a 4%er. Therefore, the 23rd, so this is going to be the evening of the 23rd as the sun is going down about probably, I don't know, 60 degrees off the horizon of the sun. No, about 30 degrees off the horizon of the sun. You will see the new moon sliver in the sky to the left of the sun as you're looking west. Okay. Now, that's not true of people who live on the other side of the world. I'm talking to mostly to American Protestant Christians here most of the time. Okay. So that begins the new month. So the first of the 7th month is actually that day. Okay. Now, let's go back into our instruction here. Okay.
So starting at Tuesday evening
through Wednesday evening. Correct. Okay. So this is what it says in 24. The children of Israel saying, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, shall be a solemn rest to you, a memorial of the blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. Now, before we get into the memorial blowing trumpets and the holy congregation or convocation, I want you to look at this. You shall do no regular work and shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahweh. Now, let's unpack offering really quick here, okay? First of all, and this is very important, it is absolutely imperative that you understand that there is no such thing as a sacrifice that offers a remission of sins through the blood of bulls and goats. Now, what that means is that the sacrifice never actually offered an atonement, okay? In fact, that word atonement is very inappropriate. What actually it's saying there is covering, and we're not going to get into that tonight. But what we are going to say, and this is important, is that we're never trying to seek to satiate God with a sacrifice. Instead, you actually give the choice cuts, right? Like the tenderloins and the ribeye, and you get to keep this sirloin, right? Okay. You give the choice cuts to the priests, and then you eat the sacrifice. So, what's a better word for sacrifice here? Let me tell you who sacrifices. People who worship false gods like to cut out the heart of their victim and drink the blood and eat their heart, thinking that they're accomplishing some sort of higher spiritual existence with that God that they're going after. And I'm going to tell you, generally speaking, according to Deuteronomy 32, that was a demon, and the demon was demanding the sacrifice. And so we don't do that. That's not what we do. We're not supposed to learn the ways of the nation. So get sacrifice out of your mind. And let's move into table fellowship. We are having table fellowship with our Father so that we are allowed to sit again at the table with him and it not be awkward.
Consider it kind of like a barbecue.
Yeah, it is a barbecue.
We're
Absolutely.
him.
I mean, it's probably medium well instead of medium rare, but still, okay. So the premise is you're going to eat that sacrifice with Yahweh on Yom Teruah. So here's tenet number one for After His Heart Ministries. We will be having a feast. We will be consuming meats. Why? Because it's a sacrifice, right? It is a slaughter of beef or lamb or goat. Okay? Beef or lamb or goat. Maybe I think you can also have venison, but that's like kind of a offshoot. Anyways, anything that chews the cud and has the cloven hoof, you're going to slaughter and eat. The rest of the time, you're really kind of supposed to be a vegetarian. But that's neither here nor there. Let's look at it more from the point of view that you reserve the fatted calf, right, for the VIP. Who's the VIP? Yahweh. But what does it say? If I was hungry, I would tell you. I'm not, right? I don't get hungry. I own cattle on 1,000 hills. I don't need your sacrifice. So what does that mean? You eat it and enjoy it with me in my presence, right? Okay, that's table fellowship. Now, a couple things are important. Number one is that that's on the evening of Yom Teruah. Now, my recommendation to you is that you spread the activities out throughout the day. One of them is not working. You need to schedule a Shabbat from Tuesday at evening to Wednesday at evening. Call in sick, whatever you got to do, rest on that day. Now, remember, if you watched any of my videos, resting is not just taking a nap. Resting is not just chilling. Resting is having an invigoration of energy within you. Okay? So that's important and relevant. Now, let's get back and unpack the rest of this. Anything you want to say?
No.
Okay. Let's move me over here. Okay. So now it says, you shall do no regular work, right? That's a Shabbat. You spread that Shabbat throughout the whole entire day. All right. But this one is the memorial of the blowing of trumpets. Now, this is going to get a little bit interesting. And we're going to go ahead and probably midrash this after we start to address questions. Are there any other questions in there besides yours?
Not yet.
Okay. So we'll address questions first, but we're definitely going to talk about this memorial, right? This memorial of the blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. What's that? That's a mikra, okay? So let's talk first about the mikra. A mikra is not an assembly. However, it is a public declaration or reading or crying out. It does not say that you have to do Torah. It does not say that you have to read the Torah portion out loud. It doesn't. Now, it does say do a reading, right? we're reading right now. But here's the interesting thing about it. We have two references in the Bible that give an idea of this reading out loud or this crying out, right? And that reading out loud or crying out loud is actually going to be patterned by Ezra. Ezra brings the Torah into the marketplace during the weekdays. So every day of the week, from Sunday all the way to Friday, or from the first day of the week all the way to the last day of the week, there is a reading of Torah that is sectioned out. It was his idea to section it out to make it into weekly readings. I believe there's 50 of them. Maybe there's less than 50. I mean, maybe there's 48 because on the feast days you have a separate reading. But when we go into this concept, what happened was then on the Shabbat, everybody would gather at the square. And instead of it being a reading of Torah, it was an expounding upon Torah. So think of it kind of like putting Bible tapes into a tape player and plugging it into a megaphone and playing it downtown, right? Nobody really commenting on it. It's just being spoken. But then on the Shabbat, everybody goes to the village square, which eventually became synagogues. And that was modeled after the Socratean model of assembly, where somebody was central and everybody else was surrounding that central person and they were giving an oration. Okay. So synagogues were kind of a later thing. But originally, everybody met in the square. Why? Because all of the merchants were not permitted to enter the city, according to Nehemiah. And so the result was everybody met in the square. There was no temptations to buy or sell or negotiate, right? And they all sat. No, they stood, and Ezra sat. So what was interesting is they would all listen to him read a section of Tanakh, of the Torah, the Nevi'im or Ketuvim, the law, the prophets, or the writings. And then he would expound upon it. Now, in Acts chapter 15, verse 21, when they have made a decision that, first of all, the new proselytes to the Jewish faith in the sect of the way would not be required to get circumcised to become a disciple. And furthermore, they would not have to go through all of the requirements of the oral Torah. They could stay with the Noahide laws until they learned Torah. And this is exactly what James actually says. He says in Acts chapter 15, verse 21, for Moshe from generations of old has in every city those who preach him, being read in the synagogues on Shabbat. So what do we know? Moses was being preached, which means the Torah was being preached, which means it was being taught. Okay, it was not just being read. Now, that's a mikra. A section of Torah is read and we expound upon it. So guess what? Technically, what we are doing right now is considered a mikra, a holy convocation. Where two or three are gathered in my name, so there am I. And of course, we know Yeshua was the Torah made flesh and dwelt among us, according to John 1:14. But the premise is that we are now having a holy convocation. We are now, right now, doing exactly what a holy convocation would be. We're reading a little bit of Torah and we're discussing it. Okay? So that brings us to the trumpets. Now, there are a couple of things that are really important. When it comes to the trumpets, there's a few very relevant things. Number one is there are three types of trumpets. Okay, there's a ram's horn, there's the Urdu horn, and there's the apex horn. Okay, now the apex horn is an antelope, has a straight horn, and generally speaking, that is considered, is that a Yemenite? Or is the Urdu the Yemenite? I think the Yemenite is the straight horn. Okay, so it's a straight horn of an apex or Africa uh, Arabian antelope. Okay, with a straight horn. The second is, of course, the Urdu horn, which is a spiraled horn, which is basically what I own. But the premise is that that is also considered a shofar. And finally, we have the ram's horn, which is actually the original, or the what we would call the shofar that they would have had in the desert, which is basically the horn of a bighorn sheep. Okay. Okay, so a couple things that are very important here in that context, and that is that each one of those is considered a trumpet. However, within the teruah itself is actually two, no, three other. It actually is two. Okay, so there is the teruah blast. There is the tekiah blast. It is four. There is the Shevarim blast, and there is the Shofar Gadol, or the Tekiah Gadol. Now, a couple things that are important. First of all, every blast is a first and a fifth. So the way you would think about this is if you were to find the two black keys that are by themselves on a keyboard, and you were to hit the key to the left of those, that's C. That's the first note in the chromatic scale without any flats or sharps added. So you're playing just the white keys. So you would count D, E, F, G. That's the fifth. So da, da, that is the fifth. Okay. So when we are listening to the shofar in a tekiah, it is a transition blast that actually cuts across the fifth transition through a bit of a squeak. And so to go, and there would be that little bit of a stutter in there from one tone to the next. And that's kept out over time. And then eventually there is a short stop at the end that goes, so to go, do, right? Okay. Now there's a couple variations of that, but basically that's the tekiah. Now the tekiah was designed around something that we see in scripture. When we see the word blast, it is usually the tekiah. Okay. So if you say, like, if they heard the blast of the horn, then it would usually be tekiah and not teruah. The second one is actually called the shevarim. It is traditional, not commanded in Tanakh at all, but it is the same as the either the 21 gun salute or the moment of silence for those who have fallen. Okay. And the shevarim means broken. In fact, the word shavar means to break. And actually, shaver means to smash. Okay. And so shavar means to break, or to cause to go asunder. And so the shevarim is a broken blast. And it goes doot, doot, doot. That's it. 3 blasts. Okay. And it's a very short transition from the first to the fifth, and really kind of, you almost can't hear the fifth. Okay. Then after that is the teruah. Now the teruah is the alarm, and it is 9 staccato blasts in a row. If you want to know what staccato is, it's a short blast and a stop. Okay. And the way that you actually make it is by saying the number two, 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 while you're blowing. But the premise is within that is the alarm. The alarm has a mechanism of bring your weapon to this location now. Okay. Now, where we see this, interestingly enough, is in our same context of our same characters, Nehemiah. In Nehemiah, they're building the wall. They have a weapon in one hand, they have the trowel in the other, and they have a shofar at their side, ready so that if they're the ones who blow the horn, everybody brings their weapon and drops their tool and comes to that location. So the principle was to defend the city while the wall was breached. Okay. So the teruah is a call to come to this location where there is a breach in the wall. Okay. Now, generally speaking, depending on who's listening, you will get more than humans responding to the teruah. But that's a midrash statement, isn't it? Okay. So now moving to the next one, we have the tekiyah. The Tekiah Gadol or the Shofar Gadol or the last trump. Now, the Tekiah Gadol actually, depending on skill, transitions 3 tones. So it goes da, and can end with an abrupt, or it can just kind of trail out. Also in the Tekiah Gadol, and I forgot to mention this with the Tekiah, also with the Tekiah Degal is you will increase in intensity or brightness of the tone. Okay. So the tone gets brighter and brighter and brighter. Now that's important because basically the way that you want to think about it is it puts a larger amplitude of vibration out there.
Vibration, right?
Yes.
It's getting more vibrant,
more
of that.
Right. Okay. So now, and this is important, that's it. So anything other than that will be a midrash. Anything other than that will be halakha to a specific synagogue, or anything other than that will be a decision made by those who choose to be whole Bible believers or Torah observant or Messianic Jews who decide how they want to honor that. So in an Orthodox synagogue, you are actually supposed to blow those 4 blasts in a very specific succession 105 times, I believe it is. Okay. Now, I believe the Gadol is only blown 40 times in that time period. And so there's that concept. Okay. Now, one of the things that I want to discuss is the concept that this is blown over the whole day. Okay. Now, in an ideal situation, when we're talking about this, you would be in the land of Israel where everybody appreciates the blast of the shofar and everybody understands that it's Yom Teruah and everybody agrees that that's what's supposed to be happening. In exile, like here in America, we have to conclude that's not necessarily prudent. I honestly do not want to share my shofar blast with the dog barking across the street. I don't want to share my shofar blast with the horn honking, the sirens blowing, the jet flying over, right? So, although I am in the opinion that you do need to spread this out over the duration of that 24-hour period from sundown, right, of the last day of the last month to sundown of the first day of the first month, I travel to my location to get away from all of that. Okay. So 2 things are important. Number one, it is absolutely imperative that you understand that there is an honoring of the shofar that I try to walk out. Okay. But if you are not able to leave the city, or you are not able to leave where you're located at, then I mean, it is what it is. So what I believe is you go to a place where it can echo. Okay. Now I know that sounds a little bit out there, but when you start to consider the purpose behind it, there is an element of there needing to be a return. Okay. So what you send out, right, comes back. Now, this is just After's Heart Ministries. This is not something that I necessarily find in Torah, but I am of the opinion that acoustics are extremely important when it comes to vibration. Okay. Um, so you set yourself in an acoustic chamber where the return of the blast is actually going to affect your body. Because what they have discovered is that the first and the fifth note have healing properties. When they're combined, they create harmony and they influence the body to actually entrain towards healing. Now, I'm not going to get into that too much because we have a Midrash question to answer. So you go ahead and read the first Midrash question.
Well, the question is, what does shofar actually mean? And this is my question. So, but I wanna tweak it a little bit because uh, I was under the understanding that Leviticus 23 was, when it said trumpet, that the word was shofar. Now I'm finding out that the word is actually not shofar. It's teruah. You
Well, no, well, so let's go ahead and look at it in the Hebrew here real quick. Okay. So when we go into Leviticus 23, and we have the commandment in the seventh month. So this is 23:24, really 23:23. We'll go into the interlinear in the Blue Letter Bible, and specifically the words that we're looking for here is that word for trumpets, right, which is teruah, right here. Okay. From the root word ruah, which we can get into, but the premise is that teruah is the actual word here, and that there isn't a word trumpets in it. There's just a teruah, which is the alarm, the signal, the cry, or the warning, right? The war cry or battle cry. And we can midrash that some more for sure.
Yeah, I because the question actually was, what is the true meaning of shofar, and is that our voice? And when I was going through this, I'm studying it. I'm looking at also that in Joshua 6:5, that great shout when they're tearing down the walls of um,
Jericho.
Jericho, is that great shout is the same teruah.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, so let's go ahead and we'll go into that. We'll just go into right here and go to um Joshua 6:5, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So when they make a long blast with this ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the shofar, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall go up every man straight before him. And now, when we go into this, we will find our words. So the first word is going to be the word keren, which is a very different word from shofar.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's shout and great shout
Right.
that are the two Sarah.
Right. Right. So the next one is Yovel, all right, which is the Jubilee horn. So we have the Keren Yovel, which is the Jubilee horn. Okay. In fact, if you go here, it actually says that it is the Jubilee ram's horn right here. Okay. In the Strong's definition. Going back here, then we also see the word Shema, right? When you hear, when you Shema, the sound, the call or the voice, right? The voice of the shofar, trumpet, then you shall ruah, you shall shout, right? All the people with a teruah, a shout or an alarm, right? Gadol, a teruah, gadol, right? Or a great alarm. Now, so your question originally was, what is the meaning of shofar?
Well, that was the original question, but when we're looking at following this command, what is the difference
What
between
is a teruah?
what is the difference between using a shofar, or is it more of the utterances of our voice?
Hmm. That's really important, right? Because we do have kind of a concept where in Jericho they shouted, right? And that was a teruah, and it was a teruah gadol, which consequently, I don't think I've ever heard a teruah gadol on a shofar. But having said that, there is also a an extra piece here that we need to consider, and that is, do we have the evidence that we would need to conclude that there was an element of resonance involved in the destruction of the wall of Jericho? Scientists have gone in, seismologists have gone in, and they've kind of examined things, and they've learned that there was some sort of seismic event. Well, you combine the whole idea of resonance where people march in step and create a vibration on the ground with the shout, which would have been at a very specific tone. And then, in fact, I believe that maybe it's in the Midrash Gadol, or if it is in, I don't remember. I'm trying to remember which Jewish commentaries. It might be Rashi that said that they sang us a tone at a very specific tone. I don't remember where I heard that before, but basically that they had actually matched to the sound of the resonance of their feet with the sound of the blowing of the shofar, and that altogether created a chamber of vibration so strong that it actually caused the wall to vibrate so much that it fell. Okay, now couple things. um we can get into the science of this, but we need to also maintain some mythos. We need to accept that there is actually a very powerful energy involved in this that does not come from a Hertzian level of science. And what I mean by that is that there was a 0 point energy present in all of that as well. In fact, it's very possible that the marching created the resonance, but the shofars and the voices created a 180-degree phase counter resonance that could have created an absolute 0 point energy. We're talking like black hole level, like a piece of reality just disappeared from under the wall, right? So we're going to accept that as the mythos, that there was the power of God involved in this. Okay, the power of Elohim. In fact, Elohim means powers, right? Okay, so does that satisfy the question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, you have another one?
Yes, I have another one. Does Yom Teruah correspond with the 10 virgins?
Ah, okay. So she's asking about the parable of the 10 virgins that is mentioned in the narrative of Yeshua, where it talks about that he gives this parable about these 10 women who come to meet the bridegroom, and they are to basically wait for him. All of them fall asleep, all of them trim their wicks, but when they wake up, the ones who were wise had oil to put in their lamps, and the ones who were unwise did not have oil. And when they went into the marketplace to buy oil, by the time they returned, the door was shut and they were not welcome. Now, there's a number of things we can unpack and get into there. But the short version is where does is there anything that indicates that there was something that actually woke them up, right? And that's going to be the important part. That's going to be the important part. So, one of the things that we want to basically get into is that question. So, first of all, in the traditional Hebrew wedding, there is a concept of there being a betrothal, a pause of absence, not necessarily physical absence, but definitely a separation between the bride and the groom that is kind of contingent upon him preparing a place for her. I guess the way that you could think about it is this is a long-term wedding plan that includes the building of a house. So it would be like, hey, you're my fiance. I'm going to make a promise to you. Okay, bye. I'm going to go build a house and go and build the house and not really get involved or interact with her until that time when they can both enter the house together.
Which is exactly what Yeshua said, right?
I'll go to prepare a place. Right. Okay. So the reason why this is important is because now we have these virgins waiting for the bridegroom. Why? Because he has been delayed. And the way that we understand this is that he was delayed because that really is kind of not interpreted correctly. It's more like he has been waiting, right? He's waiting for the right time. So now they all fall asleep. Well, what wakes them up? The blast of a shofar. Now let's talk about how that works. Passover, we have the choosing of the bride or the shidduchin, the matchmaking. Pentecost, we have the betrothal or the proposal of the groom to the bride, who by drinking the cup accepts the covenant. Okay. And then he leaves and goes and starts pouring concrete, right? To build a foundation for the house. And all that time she's apart from him. The concept of the idea is that Yom Teruah is actually the awakening of the bride. So she will wake up from her sleep through the blast of the shofar. So what do we have here? We have the virgins falling asleep, right? So there's a number of ways in which we could interpret this. We could say these virgins are actually the bridesmaids. We could say these virgins are actually a representation of the corporate collective conscience of the bride of Yeshua, right? Or the church. We could say that this is representative of the idea that the man in Torah is allowed to have more than one wife, and that was not an uncommon practice within Israel, even during Yeshua's time. However we look at it, we shouldn't miss the point that they are awakened by the shofar or by the call. Okay. And so in principle, what we want to do in this situation then is we want to kind of all agree that the the parable of the brides, or I mean the virgins, the wise virgins and the unwise virgins, is actually about Yom Teruah. Yes, correct. Okay. Any other questions?
I'm just taking a look here.
Nothing in the comments?
I don't see any.
Okay. So now we will go ahead and number one is I will just go ahead and check um with the congregation who's here on Zoom with me and see if they have any questions. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so no one is unmuting, and so that I'm going to assume then that you guys don't have any questions. Oh, wait,
Question.
go ahead.
Who in scripture actually celebrates Yom Teruah? Besides, besides Moshe.
Say that again.
Who in scripture celebrates Yom Teruah? Is there a way we can like look in the passage and see who blew the shofar and how it was done?
So interestingly enough, we don't necessarily see a whole lot going on Yom Teruah. In the Tanakh, you mean, right, Jesse? So you're saying where we would see an example of them practicing this? Does that sound correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I will show you what I know, and perhaps maybe somebody else can kind of chime in and let me know what that looks like. Okay. So specifically, we're going to be going into the book of Nehemiah, okay, or Nehemiah. And I believe that it is actually going to be in 11. Oh, in Job, sorry. Nehemiah chapter 8, I believe it is. Yes. Okay. So here it is. All the people gathered themselves together as one man into the broad place that was before the water gate. And they spoke to Ezra the Sopher to bring the book of the law of Moshe, which Yahweh had commanded Israel. Ezra the Kohen brought the law before the assembly, both men and women, and all who could hear with understanding on the first day of the 7th month. He read therein before the broad place that was before the water gate from early morning until midday, in the presence of the men and women and of those who could understand, and all the ears of the people were attentive to the book of the law. Ezra the Sopher stood on a pulpit of wood, which they had made for the purpose, and beside him stood Metiah and Shema, and Ananiah, and Uriah, and Hilkiah, and Masiah on his right hand, and on his left, Pediyahu, Mishael, Malkiah, Hashum, Hashbadna, Zechariah, and Meshulam. Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was above all the people. And when he opened it, all the people stood up. And Ezra blessed Yahweh, the great Elohim. All the people answered, Amen, Amen, with the lifting up of their hands. And they bowed their heads and worshiped Yahweh with their faces to the ground. Also, Yeshua, Bani, Sevriah, Yamin, Akuv, Shabbatai, Hodiah, Maaseiah, Kelita, Azriah, Yozvad, Hanan, Peliah, and the Levites caused the people to understand the law, and the people stood in their place. They read in the book, in the law of God distinctly, and they gave the sense so that they understood the reading. Now, Nehemiah, who was governor, and Ezra, the Kohen, the Sopher, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, This day is a holy day to Yahweh your Elohim. Don't mourn nor weep, for all the people wept when they heard the words of Torah. Then he said to them, Go your way, eat the fat, and drink the sweet, and send portions to him for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy to our Adonai. Neither be you grieved, for the joy of Yahweh is your strength. So the Levites stilled all the people, saying, Hold your shalom, for the day is holy, neither be you grieved. All the people went their way to eat and to drink and to send portions and to make great mirth, because they had understood the words that were declared to them. Okay, so that is the only instance I know of in all of Tanakh that shows the people actually keeping the feast of Yom Teruah, or the day, right, of the alarm.
I guess I got a question. Why does it seem like it's more of a, so if the purpose of Yom Teruah is kind of like a warning and also a celebration before the judgment of like Yom Kippur, right? So like, but I don't celebrate before a judgment. Like, like why is it a? It doesn't seem like that's an appropriate response
Can
to
I
coming
make a
judgment. I
statement?
celebrate once the judgment's over. I would feel more tolerant to celebrate. Like, what is the significance of Yom Teruah? I guess.
So in Revelations, we know that something happens before the wedding feast of the Lamb, right? Um, and oh, do what is that again? What is before the wedding feast of the Lamb?
The fall of Babylon.
Which is a war, right? Um, and we kind of correspond. We know that during the wedding steps that we go from Passover, from the betrothal, from the choosing of the bride to the betrothal to the wedding feast, right? And in between that betrothal and the wedding feast, the bridegroom goes away to prepare that place for us. And Yeshua says, no man knows the time, right? Because only my Father in heaven knows. Well, it was the father of the bridegroom who was in charge of telling the groom when it was appropriate to go, right? Which is why Yeshua said that no man knows, because only the Father knows when he's going to send me back, type of thing. But in Revelations, we see that there is a war before
The wedding feast.
the wedding feast. So I'm wondering if, when we look at this Teruah, and we look at the shouting of this battle cry to bring down the walls of Jericho, if it isn't the bringing on of quote unquote the war before the wedding feast.
So, Mike, do you have anything that you want to bring up with that? You had mentioned judgment, but I don't want to get too much into Yom Kippur because we will have a midrash on that. But I think, considering that I mentioned it in order to establish the timing for the counting of days and years, that we should probably get into the idea that Yom Kippur plays a role in Yom Teruah. So there's a couple things that are really important. First of all, in the book of Revelation, we also see a section where there is a judgment. And in that judgment, it says that the books were opened. And the books were opened, and the people were judged by their works according to Torah. Okay? So Torah becomes the standard. And in fact, we see this, right? We see this actually picked up by the Protestant Christians in a belief that it is a way to evangelize in the the Ray Comfort ministry, The Way of the Master, with Kirk Cameron, in which they use the Torah to activate a conviction for them to establish that the person has sinned. Problem is that then they go in and they throw in the heretical, cruel and inappropriate doctrine of hell. But in that whole process and system, we see that the Torah is the standard for the judgment. According to the tradition of Yom Teruah, the books are opened on Yom Teruah, and that is the warning blast, letting you know the books have been opened. Now you have until the 10th day in which they're going to search through all the emanations of God to find whether or not you have come up short on your attempts at honoring Torah. On the day of Yom Kippur, a covering occurs. So let's go ahead and let's just kind of look at that really quick so that you can understand better, Mike, how this could be a wedding step and not a judgment. Okay?
Okay, because I know in with like Ezra, he tells them stop weeping because that's the first time they actually heard it. In a while. And I'm like, it's an appropriate response to weep. He's like, no, it's a celebration. There's time for weeping later. But I'm like, it's appropriate.
Right. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at the commandment for Yom Kippur in Leviticus chapter 23. I believe it is verse 28. Let's see if I'm correct. No, it's 27. Okay. And this is Yom Kippur. So if we go into the interlinear here and specifically into this part right here of the interlinear, we come up with this HaKippurim right here, this word, HaKippurim, right? We go in and that comes from Kippur, which is atonement. Now, I'm just going to really quick come out of this screen. We'll jump back into it in a moment, but I'm going to really quick just get on a bit of a soapbox here. There is actually no etymological origin to the word atonement beyond the theological doctrine that is communicated by Protestant Christianity concerning a belief that atonement is the word for Kippur. It's not. And in fact, unfortunately, it's even kind of that way in the Jewish tradition as well. But truth be told is that's a horrible interpretation of that word. Okay? Instead, we have a very interesting word, and that word is Kippur. Okay? So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this really quick. Now, like I said, we can unpack this a little bit more in our Midrash about Yom Kippur. But for tonight, we will just go ahead really quick and look and see that this word, actually, the root word here is kafar, okay? Kafar, which means to cover. Ignore purge, ignore make atonement, ignore make reconciliation. It is to cover. This word is cover. In fact, v, and b, and p, and f are all labial, and P and B are often cognate confused from language to language. So cover and kafar are very similar. Why? Because in the German language, the way you pronounce a V is with an F. Yeah, that just happened. Okay, so in that sense, we need to understand kafar does not mean atone. All right? Okay, so now what we're going to do is actually discuss this concept of covering. Okay. Where do we see a reference to something being called a covering in connection with marriage? Somebody tell me.
The sorry, goodness gracious,
The chuppah?
the chuppah.
Okay. The chuppah is actually not the answer. However, there is definitely a concept behind the chuppah that we definitely need to discuss. Okay. So what do we know? We know that there is within the mechanism of Tanakh and the latter writings, which includes the narratives of Yeshua and the letters of the disciples to the people, including the book of Revelation, we have a communication of marriage theme. Okay. The choosing of the bride, the Shidduchim, the betrothal of the bride, the Erusin, the ratification of the covenant, Yom Kippur. Okay. And what you need to understand is that after Yom Kippur comes the wedding feast, which is the Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, there's a couple of things that are very important. Number one is that we understand that some of the feast days have the word Yom next to them, and some of them do not. And these ones that have Yom next to them are single day feasts, and the ones that don't have Yom next to them are not single day feasts. Okay. Now, what is important with that? Well, I'll take that back, because Pentecost does seem to be a single day feast. However, it is important to understand that Pentecost is actually all of the counting up to Pentecost as well, right? The 50 days, or the counting of the Omer. All right. So where do you think, does anybody else want to throw out there and say where they think that they have actually encountered a reference to a covering when it came to marriage?
Well, what about when it's written, all your actions are like filthy rags, and then he gives you the white robes.
Okay, so that actually is not it either. However, that is a good reference. Here we go. So we are going to go into, wait for that screen broadcast to begin. We are going to go into the book of Ruth. And very specifically, we're going to be looking in, Ruth chapter 3, and down here in verse 4, in Ruth chapter 3, it says, "It shall be when he lies down that you shall mark the place where he shall lie, and you shall go in and uncover his feet and lay you down, and he will tell you what to do next." Now, she said to her, "All that you say I will do." She went down to the threshing floor and did according to all her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid her down. It happened at midnight that the man was afraid and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" She answered, "Ruth," or "I am Ruth, your handmaid. Spread therefore your skirt over your handmaid, for you are near kinsman." Now, what this actually says in the Hebrew here is what? To cover her, right? Spread therefore, or parash, your covering, which is what? The kanaf. Now, let's talk a minute about the kanaf. Okay. The kanaf, the word for kanaf is wing. Okay. The word for kanaf is wing. And so think of the wing of a bird, right? That actually puts its wing over something, right? To cover over it or protect it. But there's another actual special reference here, and I will show it to you. I believe it is in Deuteronomy 21, but I might have to stumble a little bit over this searching for it, but I'm pretty sure. Actually, no, 22 comes to mind. It was probably 22. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 22, and we're going to look at, I believe it is down in here. Here we go. So you shall make tzitziot on the four borders of your cloak with which you cover yourself. Okay. So let's go ahead and look into the Hebrew here. So it actually is going to say here that you shall put what? Tzitzit on the four wings, kanaf, of your covering, right? The four wings of your covering, right? Thy vesture, which is the kesut, which is the word for coat in the modern Hebrew. And kisah is the word for covering, or to cover, right? To cover or conceal or hide. So that which you hide yourself in has to have these tzitziot, or these tassels, on the four wings, right? And so what do we understand? That she was asking him to spread his seat over her, right? Spread his covering by which he covered himself over her. Now the tradition is that you would take that you would take that thing, and you would actually cover the you would actually cover over the marriage canopy with it. Okay. And so the premise is that you were traditionally spreading that covering over, which is where we do get the chuppah, right? Now, the chuppah is actually a variation or a cognate of the word kafar, which means to cover. So it's actually chufa, right? But that's another discussion, because when we get into cognates, we get into the evolution of a language in which people use soundings, but the lettering may change with the soundings. Same is true of the samek when it comes to the sheen, when we have the seen or the S pronunciation in the sheen, when the sheen was just a sh, right? You go into the Cyrillic alphabet that the Russians use, there's a sh, and it's the shape of a sheen. Okay, so
is that what Yeshua was talking about before his death, when he was praying that he wanted to cover Jerusalem like a hen covered her chicks?
I think in a lot of ways that is probably true, yes. But I also do believe that there is a family theme built in. That's where the slaughter comes in, because the family theme is that you can sit as the inheritor at the table and be out of favor and not receive the inheritance. But if you sit at the table and consume with the grantor, then you are actually in favor with them. So if you're allowed to eat at the table, which is what Yahweh is saying when he says you're going to do a sacrifice on the feast day, I'm inviting you to my table. You're still my inheritor. You're still my heir. Okay. All right. So when we talk about family theme, we're not talking about war. When we talk about family theme, we're not talking about the wedding. So let's get back to the wedding. What is Yom Kippur? It is the ratification of the covenant. So what happens? After there is the betrothal and the separation time in which he prepares a place for her, Traditionally, what will happen is there will be an annunciation that he has arrived, and then a party is sent to her home and actually gets so a party is sent to her home and actually picks her up and brings her to the new home, where either in the parents' home or in a public place they have set up the chuppah. Both of them go under, make vows, turn around. They do a circling around of the couple, and then there are witnesses who bear witness to the get, that it was written and prepared and sealed, and I'll explain that in a minute, and the ketuvah, the writing. The ketuvah is the writing of the marriage, or the document of the marriage. That marriage covenant will state all of the terms of the covenant that the groom proposed to the bride when she agreed and drank the cup. Now, this is important because the ratification of the covenant will have witnesses, whereas the betrothal doesn't necessarily have to have witnesses beyond the bridegroom's father and the bride's father and the shadchan. Okay. The ratification will publicly declare that this person is now the wife and this person is now the husband of such and such. Then they go into the marriage feast. They consume a meal. They go into the chamber where they will consummate the marriage, right? Or the nesassin, which is the ratification and then consummation, right, of the marriage. And they're outside will continue a festival celebrating the marriage itself that will usually last about 1 week. So a couple things that obviously we need to get into here. Number one is, Mike, when we talk about judgment, we're talking about the books being opened. That is not about the wedding feast. That is not about the wedding. And so when we get into Yom Teruah, there's a warning that the books are opened. Judgment isn't coming. Judgment has begun. When the shofars are blown, judgment has begun. What happens is on Yom Kippur, the books are closed again and sealed. So whatever is determined from each judgment. So what will happen, and this is what it says, is that angels will actually determine the works that are recorded. So there are actually people or entities watching and recording our works. Those books are opened and compared to Torah, and whatever the judgments of Torah are, that's not the right word, whatever the determination of either punitive damage or restitution or whatever that is determined for that person because of that violation, they have until Yom Kippur to create a confession, right? Why were the people weeping? They were weeping because they were hearing Torah and realizing that they had not kept it, right? So is there built into Judaism a reading of the entire Torah from the beginning of morning until the end of morning? Well, number one, English has a lot more words than Hebrew, and so that would be a very different reading, right? We're talking more like from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock at night, maybe. But the premise is that, is there a tradition for that in Judaism? No, there is not. What we do have is some other traditions in Judaism that we can bring up, like Tashlik and Kol Nidre. Okay, so the way that you want to think about Yom Teruah is as a war or a judgment upon the, or I'm sorry, as a war or a judgment. It is obviously about Yom Kippur being the sealing of the books. And really, that's the covering of the books, right? They won't be viewed again until next year. Then we have the actual ratification of the covenant of the marriage that was betrothed at Pentecost, and that was initiated as a negotiation between the bridegroom's father and the bridegroom, or the bride's father, and the shadchan, or the matchmaker, that is agreed upon to be the proposed information that's going to be brought to the bride when the when the actual proposal is made. She's going to drink the cup in agreement to the covenant. Okay. So there were a number of things that we need to take into consideration. The first is the 10 days of awe. The 10 days of awe is the time from the first of the 7th month until the 10th day of the 7th month on the evening of the 9th month at sundown. So the evening of the 9th month at sundown actually starts the 10th day of the month. And the evening of the 9th month at sundown starts the action of Yom Kippur. So those 10 days are called the 10 days of awe. During that time, the books are open and considerations are made. It is the last chance for you to teshuvah. So teshuvah is going to be that you are going to return to the tent, that you are going to step back in humility and say, you know what? I created all of these desires and sins and darkness, but I'm going to come to you and say that I actually do not own these things. In other words, I don't want to suffer for them. And I am cut to the heart that I violated them, right? Okay, so the 10 days of awe, or what we call teshuvah, which is basically teshuvah, is the returning to the tent, right? It is the time period in which you are going to go before God and repent of the things that you have done. Now, the season of repentance will not come around again until the time of the sin that you committed. So if you committed a sin, say in July of that year, pagan calendar, I know, but that is when that temptation will come again, or when that judgment will come again, depending on what you had done the year before. So Yom Kippur seals that as a temptation or as a judgment. Temptation, why? Because in order for you to demonstrate that you're truly repentant, you have to be tempted in it again. And so you'll be tempted to do the same thing again at that same time period, and then you will enter the season of Teshuvah, as in from the time that Yom Kippur ends until that moment when you overcome, you are in a state of we're not sure yet. It's like a probation period. But then when you overcome, then that work is now written. And at the next Yom Kippur, it will come through and say, they overcome, therefore the reward, because overcoming is the obedience to Torah. And according to Deuteronomy 28, when you're obedient to Torah, then all of the things that apply from Deuteronomy 28:1 all the way through 14 are for you, the head and not the tail. All of your business negotiations, your kneading boards, your kneading bowls and your grinding boards and all that will be blessed. Your children blessed, right? Etc., etc., etc. Now, the reason why this is so important is because now we understand that Yom Kippur is kind of what seals that. So, Mike, on the one side, you have the weeping because of the repentance, right? But what do they say? No, have joy. Why? Because you've repented already. The moment you're cut to the heart, you don't need to say anything. The moment you have that moment, you don't need to say anything. Unless you just like blatantly, habitually repeat it during Teshuvah, which I would not recommend. So let's say that we use theft, because thou shalt not steal is a sin punishable by death. If a thief is caught stealing in the daytime and they're recognizable, then they will be judged according to the fact that that's, oh yeah, that's the guy. We know who that is, right? But if it's not, if you can't identify them, you're allowed to kill them. It's pretty much the make my day law. But the rule is that it really doesn't matter whether you know them or not. If they enter your home and when it is dark, when the sun has fallen, that all rules are off, all bets are off. Okay, so when we're dealing with stealing, let's say that we have now entered Yom Teruah, and you are cut to the heart because you hear "Thou shalt not steal," Mike. Then you have repented. You needn't go to Yom Kippur and say, "I have stolen." He knows. He tests the hearts, right? But now we come around to say August when you stole, and now you're going to be tempted to steal again. Now that's more than Yom Kippur Midrash, but what I'm trying to help you understand is that's why they were telling him, have joy. This is a feast day. You're supposed to sit at the table with Yahweh on this day. Go to the tent of meeting, sit down on the picnic table, and eat your steak and quit being weirdos. Right? That's the premise. So in principle, we're going to shift our mourning to joy. We're going to shift our tears to laughter. And the reason we are is because if you are cut to heart, Mike, no, it is not appropriate. It is not right that they would weep, because being cut to the heart was the moment of that change. And therefore, that is the moment of atonement, as we should be calling it. Unfortunately, we call it the Day of Atonement, which is the day of covering. Covering of what? Of the scroll that contains the judgments that no longer can be checked to say, oh, let me go in and get the razor blade and scrape that Hebrew word off of the scroll, right? It's written, sealed, done, right? So now you understand how on the one side we have the day of covering, which is clearly a wedding step reference, also being the day of the sealing of the books. Does that answer your question, Mike?
I think I'm left with more questions, but what?
That's okay. Post them in the Midrash.
All right. So I guess the purpose then is to celebrate that we have 10 more days before now that the book's open, before the book closes again.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, right? So what does the shofar do? In fact, do you guys know that there's actually a tradition in Judaism, in Hasidic Judaism specifically, I believe it is, where you actually blow the shofar every day of the month of Elul. Now, there's a couple things that are important. Number one, the month of Elul is one of the only months where we do not have a pantheon, Babylonian pantheon name for the day. Okay.
Just for the people that don't know, the month of Elul was the
sixth month. And I was going to say that. Yeah. So the first month, Nisan, is unfortunately a Babylonian god. The second month, Sivan, I believe, is a Babylonian god. The month after that, I believe, is Iyar, I believe, is a Babylonian god. And then the month after that is the month of Tammuz, which is definitely a Babylonian god. Av is actually a Babylonian god. And then what? Elul. Now, here's the interesting thing about Elul is there's not a good tracing of it. Like, it's hard to identify where it came from. But what's interesting is the month of Elul is actually the acronym, I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. Okay. And so during the month of Elul, we actually have the blowing of the shofar every day in what we call the season of Teshuvah, which is basically where we are going to be in a season of repentance all the way up until Yom Kippur. Now, the premise is that on Yom Teruah, the blowing of the shofar is not just the single blast in the morning to awaken the soul to Elul, Ani ledudi li, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine, but there is also an actual warning. What is the warning? So it's interesting what's happening in the world of this kingship by which there would be a judgment. He actually has done something interesting. In the 6th month, he has gone out into the field and made himself available to the people before the 10 days of awe. During the 10 days of awe, he enters the city, and when he does, the shofars are blown to announce that he has entered the city. During the 10 days of awe, he's going to go be in the city available, but not like he was in the field. Now he has his entourage who's already gotten to follow him into the city. And so he has the guards and everything else, and he's getting ready to enter the palace. And on Yom Kippur, he enters the palace. Now, what's important about that is the concept that when the shofars are blown, the soul is awakened to the season of the 10 days of awe. The soul is awakened to know that in the next 10 days, 10 virgins, there will be a sealing, a ratification of the covenant, a sealing of judgment, and the king will enter his palace for another year and will not be accessible except through the messengers who bring information available to those who are willing to count the Omer. So during the counting of the Omer, we have access to the powers and authorities of the king, but we don't have access to the king until the month of Elul. Remember, he who walks among his people is king, right? Well, this is that month and this is that thing. Okay.
For the next few days
For the next few days
evening.
until Tuesday evening, in which he will enter the city, right? Now he'll be less accessible during that time because really it's the VIPs who get to contact him at that time.
Those who are awake and knowing what time it is and how to expect him, and that he should be in the field, and
those who have the oil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now any other questions concerning that? Mike, are you good on that?
I posted a couple in the Midrash thing, but
okay.
Otherwise,
so the reason why I want you guys to post them in the Midrash is so that the rest of the congregation who's not watching tonight can see those questions, but then they can watch this and see those answers. Okay, that's why I want the questions in the Midrash. So
Mike says, what was the significance of the closing of the book, and what is the significance of Ruth uncovering Boaz's feet?
Oh, yes. So that is a really interesting question. And I'm going to tell you, I have searched to try to find the reason why Ruth uncovered his feet. And although we can definitely midrash it, I have found nothing. And I have definitely searched. And so if there's a rabbi out there or there's somebody who knows, hey, throw it in the comments, or you know, if you discover it, throw it in the Midrash in the congregation channel. That is going to be my answer. I apologize, Mike. If anything, we can conclude that the feet are considered very sacred, that which you tread upon is that which you own. Okay.
So if we look at just that which you tread upon is that what you own. Putting herself at his feet would be that kind of suggestion of
I am yours.
Will you own me? Mm-hmm. Or will you take ownership?
Well, and it's interesting because really the kinsman redeemer is about debt. And so, one thing we don't understand about this story that we should probably acknowledge is that a kinsman redeemer was allowed to buy the slave in order to release them from slavery.
Is that why they had to remove their shoe if they weren't going to take ownership of the kinsman?
Explain.
Well, in this in Ruth, it talks about, you know, how Boaz in front of the whole congregation says talks to the actual kinsman because he wasn't the he was near
second
the
runner-up,
kinsman.
yeah.
He was the second runner up. But he talks to the kinsman, and the kinsman removes his shoe and says, I'm not taking her.
Yeah, and there's something about spitting in the face of the person who doesn't redeem their kin or something like that. I don't remember. I'd have to actually look it up in Torah, but that's the concept there. Okay, so what else we got?
Oh, he also asked, what is the significance of closing the books?
Can I talk about the foot thing one more time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so like the other thing that I got with that is, okay, so if you're in the middle of a good sleep, right? And then all of a sudden, like you kick your feet out of the covers, your feet get cold, you wake up, you're like, what the heck? I'm freezing. So she purposely did that. Like, you know, she's like,
Get him to wake up.
I love you. And I'm like,
it says he was
ask your hand in
startled
many ways.
around midnight.
So,
like, wait a minute, my feet
I
are
didn't
cold.
want
What's
to-
going on?
Yeah, I guess she didn't want to be like some creeper being like, oh, you know, but
Goodness gracious, if anybody did
yeah,
that nowadays, it
like
would definitely be a creeper.
like the extended car, like the extended car warranty guy. Let me just squeeze in here. Have you given any consideration of marrying me?
you know, so
Okay. What? Any more questions?
No.
Okay.
Other than closing the book, was the significance of closing the book.
Okay. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to listen to Yeshua's words in Matthew chapter 8. Now, I know in Nehemiah Gordon's book, the Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus, he addresses the idea that it doesn't actually read the way it reads. But I'm just going to go ahead and quote the English here and say, the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses. We'll need to address that first. Therefore, do what they say, but do not do what they do, because they say, but they do not do. Now, specifically, what this is saying, what is the seat of Moses? Moses' seat was the thing that he would sit upon from morning until evening, okay, and judge the people. And when Jethro shows up, he says, dude, you're going to burn yourself out. You better delegate that. And so then he has to what? He has to transition from one level of leader to another level of leader and begin to delegate, okay? And when he delegates, the seat of Moses is occupied by those judges. Now, in Deuteronomy, it says that during that time, Yahweh took a piece of the spirit of Moses and let it rest upon those judges. So when Yeshua says the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses, it is imperative that you understand he's endorsing them. Now, I know Nehemiah Gordon claims that's not true, but he's a Karaite Jew, and we need to accept that there's probably a little bit of bias there. But in general, what Yeshua is communicating is do what they say, but do not act like them, because they do not practice what they preach, right? That's the general sentiment here. So why is that important? Because what we're going to do is we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What do the Jews do, the rabbinical Jews do on Yom Teruah? Well, there's two traditions, okay? The first one is called Tashlik. Tashlik is the Hebrew word in the tense of present tense, in the masculine plural reference, no, second person masculine plural, which is you shall. So what is tashlik? It's from the root word shalach, and shalach means to send forth, to send out, to project outward, and it is specifically about the firing of an arrow. Okay, so tashlik is you shall send forth. Well, that concept of sending forth is the idea of a releasing. Here we go back into that weeping. No, you need to have joy. Why? Because you've already been released from this thing, right? So the way that they practice this now, but real quick, I want to explain Hebrews and then Jews. All right. Hebrews, we're talking about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the sons of Israel. Jews, tribe of Judah, post-exilic Jews, right? Practice things a certain way. Nomadic ancient Hebrews practice things a certain way, but both of them were and are symbolic people. Now, there's a number of reasons why this is true. But for example, when we are sitting at the table and we cover the challah, right? We cover the bread, right? That's braided. Do you guys know that that's actually a tradition that has nothing to do with keeping the bread fresh? It actually has to do with the fact that the bread is such a great honor to be at the table, but we actually partake of the wine first, saying the blessing over the wine and speaking the kiddush. Instead of saying the blessing and speaking the kiddush with the bread, we say it with the wine, even though those two are equal on the table. The bread is going to have to wait its turn, and therefore we cover the bread. Now, why do we do that weird stuff? Because if we are willing to do that for bread, how much more are we willing to do it for something that's significant like a human, where we do not want to embarrass another human? In fact, embarrassment can potentially fall under the judgment of murder in oral Torah. You can embarrass a person significant enough to damage their livelihood, it actually can be considered murder. Now, from that perspective, then we get back into the idea that we take bread and we throw it into water, and that bread is then eaten by fish. And so now we have this symbol of our sins being consumed or taken away by something else. Now that's in Orthodox and Hasidic Jewish circles, which means what? This has nothing to do with Messiah Yeshua. This has to do with a belief that when you enter the season of Tishvat, you need to what? Have joy, because it's taken away, right? It's clear. It's not going to be counted against you. Now, I have taken this a step further, and I will explain that in a minute. But what I really want to get across here is the concept of tashlik being a really good way to symbolically release those things that you don't want to let go of. Okay? To send forth. Now, there is a concept: cast your bread upon the waters, and not many days it shall return to you. People are like, well, wait a minute, you're sending out your sins, but you don't want them to return to you. Well, but you do want the reward of overcoming, right? We know that our sins are going to return to us. They're going to visit us in the season in which we dishonored the Torah to begin with, because we need that overcoming. We need that teshuvah. So here is the concept of tashlik. You take some bread, you go to some water, you throw it on the water. As you take the pieces and you throw them upon the water, what you are doing is you are accepting that heaven has a better plan for your sin than you do. Because truth be told is you're more than willing to do that for a human being. If you step into a state of forgiveness, you are saying, I will allow heaven to deal with you better than I ever could. Well, the same is true here. And I can tell you that this carries forward beyond Yom Teruah, okay? This carries forward into every aspect of your life. If you start to come into a state where you feel condemned, I'm just going to remind you of what it felt like to be out and about, to be misbehave and be told, you wait till we get home. What happened? What actually yeah. So it's like, man, my whole day is ruined. It doesn't matter what happened. You could take me to get ice cream, take me to Elitch's. You could do all those things and then buy me toys, Transformers. That was my favorite. Legos. That was my favorite. I know that doesn't matter. None of that matters. I want to get home and get that over with right now.
So is this book equivalent to like the book of life? Where
Somewhat, yes.
all your judgments? Okay.
Now, there's something you need to know. The book of life cannot be merited. It can't. It is a position that you were given because of Yeshua. Simple as that. Now, I don't really know what the Jews think about the book of life, right? But I know that the Lamb's book of life, written of in Revelation, positions you in a place different than those who are not in it. Now, when we are talking about the Lamb's book of life, we are not talking about the works that will be judged. That is going to happen no matter who you are. Because if Yahweh gave special excuse, I'm going to say something real quick. I'll get on my soapbox for a second here. I was part of a Christian organization that was designed to generate leaders, right? To create men who would come out as a leader and strong and able to guide his family and all those type of things. And they claimed to be non-denominational. But one thing that happened at every retreat camp, well, there's two things that happened. One thing that happened at every retreat camp is they would always have a session in which they would give people an opportunity to receive the Holy Spirit so they could speak in tongues. Okay. The second thing that happened is there would always be a keynote speaker. There would always be some guest note speaker who always preached a charismatic Pentecostal message. So I'll get on my soapbox and say, if you're going to be non-denominational, be non-denominational. If you're not, then don't. But the premise is that person stood up, or a person stood up during one of those sessions, not during the speaking in tongues session, but during the keynote speaking session, and said, let me tell you what Christ has done for you. And he read Deuteronomy 28. And he read just the first 14 verses. And then he said, Christ gave you the free gift that you do not have to keep Torah now in order to receive those blessings. You just receive them because that is the gift of God, right? So he was obviously preaching against the truth of Torah, etc. But what's interesting is this concept or this idea that if you are in Christ, you are excused from those judgments that is spoken of in Revelation. But truth be told is all that is Yom Kippur, which is proof that Revelation is cyclical. But let's say that we just go with the idea that you have these books opened and judgments read or works compared to Torah, judgments determined, doesn't matter who you are. Because if Yahweh was to give one single people a better privilege than another people and hold this people accountable to the point of death because of their violations of it, that is an unjust God. I refuse to serve a God like that. I will not. I will not. I'll go find another God. Good luck. Good luck with good luck with your biased and your diversified rulings, because that's not the type of God I want to serve. I want somebody who's going to treat people equal across the board. That's what righteousness means anyways. Equal distribution of justice, equal distribution of wealth. Okay. And so now we get into the idea that whether you're in the Lamb's Book of Life or not, you're still going to be judged according to those books, according to your works and according to Torah. Okay. All right. So getting back to Tashlik, unless you had something further, Mike.
No, you're good.
What's that?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. So getting back to Tashlik, we have that concept that on the day, and I'm going to say this, some Orthodox Jews go out in the evening of that beginning of that day. Some go out during the day in the morning. But the premise is they go find a body of water, throw bread in there, and boom, Tashlik has occurred. Now, they don't believe that the fish eat their sins. They don't believe that their sins are in the bread. In fact, most rabbis will say, leave your bread at home, go throw stones, and don't throw away food. That's what they're saying. All right. So Tashlik, you can have a pocket full of stones and throw those and name it. Because why? We're not talking about transubstantiation here. Christ does not become the bread, right? That there is only symbols here, right? Okay. So the Pharisees say, go do this tradition. So we're going to honor that because why? Yeshua said, if your traditions annul Torah, then I don't approve. But otherwise, do what they say, right? Okay, so now go into the next section. There is in the High Holy books, and let me explain the High Holy Holiday books. Gosh, I can't remember the name of it now. It starts with an M, but is it the Matzuk? I think it's the Matzuk. Okay, don't quote me on that, okay? But there is an actual book with special prayers that you pray only on Yom Teruah and never any other. This is the highest, holiest holiday of the year, okay? There is something called Kol Nidre. Now, Kol Nidre does come up in Yom Kippur as part of the confessions part of Yom Kippur, the beating of the chest part of the Yom Kippur, where we say that we have made rash vows. However, Kol Nidre, or all vows, are annulled on the first of the 7th month. Now, this is very important because this can have to do with mistakes you've made with contracts and all kinds of stuff. You start to get into Jewish business law, and there's all kinds of information about what happens on Kol Nidre. But Kol Nidre is all vows. If you arrive at Yom Kippur and decide that it was a vow that was legit, you re-up it after Yom Kippur. You actually release yourself from every obligation that you have committed to in Kol Nidre. Now, where this becomes important is where you've made rash vows, where you've made mistakes. In fact, I'm going to throw something at you guys that might kind of trip you out. Remember Jehu? Remember Jehu says, he goes into battle and he says, Yahweh, if you give me this battle, the first thing that comes through my gates, I will sacrifice to you. Well, first of all, we know, number one, that he could not sacrifice his daughter. She comes through the gate and he says, daughter, you have caused me great sorrow today, right? Do we ever see it say that he sacrificed her? No. But Christians are absolutely convinced that that did occur, which is more proof that the Old Testament is a problem. Kol Nidre would have given him an opportunity to disavow himself of that vow and be in the state of teshuvah of that vow. So think about promises that you made, maybe, that you didn't keep. This is the time to release yourself from it. No longer carry the guilt that you didn't keep it. No longer carry the shame that it was not completed. Or worse yet, no longer feel obligated to something that violates your principles. This is the time to release yourself from that. Going into Yom Kippur with a pure heart in disagreement with consents that you made to your reality that you don't want there. Kol Nidre is it. It's a powerful tradition if you really put your heart into it.
And that comes really from when in the Torah where it talks about that a father or a husband can annul what the bride or the daughter has said, right? If the daughter or the bride has put herself in a contract, that the husband or the father can annul that contract in the day that he hears of it.
And where would this have been absolutely appropriate? The garden. Adam could have annulled that contract between Eve and the serpent. He could have shut it down, but instead he was right there with her and ate the fruit. Okay. Next question. Any questions? Guys, inaction equals consent. It is. Go ahead. There is one?
No, Leviticus 5:1.
Okay, tell me about that.
Leviticus 5:1. Where
let's look it up.
Yep.
Okay. So you said it was Leviticus 5:1?
Mm-hmm.
If anyone sins in that he hears the voice of adjuration, he being a witness, whether he has seen or known, if he doesn't report it, then he shall bear his iniquity. So let's see what this adjuration is. Swearing. If a soul, and a soul, if sin and hear the voice of swearing, and his witness, whether has seen or known of it, he do not utter, then he shall bear his iniquity. Okay. So let's be careful not to put words in here. But what she's saying is that if you bear witness of something, then you actually have to report it, right?
Speak up, witness it.
Yeah. And so inaction equals consent. So I'm going to show you something. If you consent to something that you did not want to consent to because you did not take action, kol nidre is the time to get yourself released from it. That's why it says, if somebody has aught against you, when you are bringing your offering, do leave the offering at the altar, then go and what? Be reconciled to your brother. In other words, if somebody has something where you are in debt to them, you go and you get it straightened out. This could get really interesting if America ever became Torah observant, because once a year we'd have to let people out of things that they had obligated them to, like for example, a 26.25% credit card interest that they didn't realize was going to that's how big it was going to be because they didn't read the fine print. That's sufficient enough in Torah for the person to be released because they did not in good faith know everything that they were getting themselves into. Now, American law would contend that it is your responsibility as the consumer to read the fine print. But truth be told, in Torah, good faith is good faith. Full disclosure is full disclosure. This is how you make a sale. I'm going to give you a 25.25%, 25.26% credit card.
Right.
You're going to pay that much, just so you know.
And not put into
little
fine print where you have to put on your glasses and
right. So Kol Nidre is really powerful. And what I wanted to do really quick is I wanted to just give me a second. I want to go to the Chabad website real quick, and I want to kind of read their explanation of Kol Nidre. I think, let me just go look real quick. I wasn't actually planning on doing this, and so I want to make sure that it is what I want, because I'm not going to sit here and read something from Rabbinic Judaism who denies Yeshua and says that he's boiling feces in hell and actually be propagating that on my channel. I would rather I just get a general definition is what I'm looking for. So let's see if we can do that. So this is going to be Kol Nidre. Okay, so this is actually saying it's said on Yom Kippur Eve, but I've actually seen it in the books where it is actually addressed on it's actually addressed on during Tashlik. But one thing about it is it varies from the Holocaust varies from it varies from Jewish sect to Jewish sect. Now, having said that, let me say, regardless of when Kol Nidre is, if it's in the Yom Kippur season, then that's fine. But it would probably be a good idea to get your head wrapped around the release of a vow through the throwing of a stone or the throwing of bread upon water. Just saying, right? And so that is one of the reasons why I brought it up, is because there is that element of releasing. Okay.
Right. So we have from now, we've had, whenever you wake up and say, wait a minute, my heart's not really right, or my spirit is condemning me of something, we have from now until the closing of the books to be able to teshuvah of those things and get rid of them. We shouldn't have to wait until the closing of the book, but we certainly have till the closing of the book to make our spirits and our hearts right with the Father, and being able to say, I can stand before the King and say, I'm okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is not, we are without merit.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I actually had, was it Rabbi Morty or was it the other rabbi? One of the anti-missionary rabbis like, oh, it's purely transactional when it comes to Christianity, right? When it comes to Christ, it's purely transactional. Let's get something clear, okay? The offering of an unmerited position in the kingdom of heaven as a righteousness of God is not transactional. It's actually something that is completely foreign to a Jewish mind. And that is that you could have a clear conscience in such a way that, and the reason you can is because you never earned the position that you're in. Now, where we could probably encroach upon that is that rabbinical Judaism teaches that a Jewish soul is very different and special from a goyim soul. So a Jewish soul is better or more blessed than a soul of a Gentile. Now, that concept is believed to be unmerited. So where we could really kind of get into the argument of, wait a minute, you guys believe that this position is unmerited. Can you explain why it's unmerited? Oh, well, Hashem just made the decision, and therefore that's whoever became a Jewish soul, and whoever he didn't want a Jewish soul, didn't want a Jewish soul. Now you sound like a Calvinist. You really want to jive with them? Because let me tell you what, they were a mess.
Yeah, and how do we reconcile Ruth?
Yeah. How do we reconcile Ruth? True. Okay.
How
So
do we reconcile
actually, you know what? I think that they have.
Ephraim and Manasseh?
I think that they actually have a concept that Dinah was the mother or something like that. The Dinah, the girl that had the thing happen with Shechem, and Shechem went and got circumcised, and then they killed him while they were while they were still recovering. That Dinah actually was sent away to Egypt, and she is actually was base math's grandmother or mother or something like that, and therefore the priest of On, who was Joseph's wife's father-in-law, was actually Dinah's son, and so they still were within the bloodline. I don't know if I buy into all that, but I can tell you, because I'm going to do my best to honor what Yeshua said. The Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses. That is a Jewish tradition. And if that's a Jewish tradition, then we honor it until we can't prove it. Okay. And so can we say that it did happen? Nope. Can we say that it didn't? Nope. So guess what? Shut up. Right? That's the premise there. Do not sit there and say, oh, well, we can't trust the Jews, and that's probably a lie. Because I can show you a bunch of history, a bunch of folklore that's claimed by a bunch of people who, guess what? We can't prove it. And they can't prove it. In fact, I'll just throw something out there for you American Protestant Christians who may be watching this. Do you guys know why the British and eventually the Americans, after we had the Revolutionary War, were able to take the land from the Indians? Because they could not prove that it was theirs. That's it. That's all it was. The King of England could prove that the land that he had was theirs. And therefore, that was why. Now, there was a whole bunch of very inappropriate things that happened in that history, and that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is that they claimed it was theirs, but they couldn't prove it. In fact, each tribe claimed it was theirs and couldn't prove it. So this tribe would say, oh, no, that's our land over there. Those are our mountains. And another tribe would say, oh, no, that's our mountains. They didn't even know each other. And so that's one of the reasons why the politics happened the way that they did. Now, is that justified? I'm not going there. All I'm saying is you can't prove folklore, but you can't disprove it either. The land probably was theirs, but we couldn't prove it. So we felt like we could take it. Right? And I shouldn't say we, because I'm Native American myself. But the premise here, in all of its essence, is that idea that there is no merit behind the position that you're actually in. So you need to walk into Yom Kippur with a very different attitude than the nations. The nations go in there beating their breasts, saying they're a sinner, whatever. The Pharisees go in there and say, thank you, God, for not making me a sinner. Both of those are messed up attitudes. You need to go in there saying, you know what? I never earned any of this anyways. So what's the problem? I can't do anything bad to mess it up. So the only thing that's really happening is I'm carrying guilt because I created some sort of violation of social justice. Because that's all Torah is. It's social justice. It's actually looking out for your fellow man and for animals and protecting the things that can't protect themselves. Did you see what it said in I believe it was Nehemiah? It said, go out and what? Give gifts to the less fortunate. Go home, drink, eat, be merry, and then send gifts to the less fortunate as an act of joy.
So that they can have joy too.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be something that the biggest distributions of wealth occur actually on the feast days? Do you know there's actually a concept? You know how there's a Christmas and Easter Christian, where basically that's when they go to church, is at Christmas and Easter. So they'll show up for the sunrise service at Easter and the midnight mass, and that's it, right? Well, there is a Yom Kippur and Passover Jew. And one of the interesting things is the Black Friday for the Jews in the synagogue is actually Yom Kippur. More tzedakah is given on Yom Kippur than every other day of the entire year. So
somebody forgot their tithing.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Comments? Anything?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, I think when we look at this, and like I said, let me say this. From what I remember of the Yom Kippur prayers, which I would have to go get a sitter and look them up, and we are still going to Midrash Yom Kippur. There was a mention of Kol Nidre as part of the prayers, but then there is an identification of Kol Nidre at, and I'm almost positive this in the High Holy Holiday books, at Yom Teruah. Now, obviously, don't quote me on that because obviously Chabad.org says that it's on the evening of Yom Kippur. But it would be a really good idea to figure out everything that you need to let go of so that you walk into Yom Kippur without guilt, without shame, without a belief that you need to be punished. Prepared to know that when those things roll around the next year, there are going to be temptations and not judgments. Walking into that room and saying, okay, I am sitting here and I am in belief that I am in the position that I was put without merit, and that's it. And being able to say that with a clear conscience. I think that's powerful. That begins at Yom Teruah. Should have actually began at the first of Elul, the first of the 6th month, when we began blowing the shofar, when we begin awakening the soul, when we begin meeting the king in the field, when we begin the 40 days of introspection, when we look deep into our hearts to see the things that are dark and we need to tikkun. One of the things that's happened in this 40 days of introspection that I've never ever had before is there have been like 5 tikkuns, big ones, like family relationship tikkuns. You say, what's a tikkun? A repair of the breach. There's been some sort of breach. There's been some sort of desire or darkness or something. And now there is a teshuvah. There is a change. And there is some sort of repair in the universe of that breach. There have been 5 in this past month. Okay, so on Tuesday evening, as the sun sets, there will be a sighting of the new moon. If it is cloudy, we're just going to go with it because A, that's what NASA says is going to happen, and B, that's what the formulated algorithm that Michael Rood uses says is going to happen. In other words, one of the things that we do is we go ahead and accept that Nehemiah Gordon and Michael Rood have kind of come up with a really good system for determining whether it is that day of the feast or not before it's that day of the feast. So technically we have a pretty like a 99.9% accuracy on that. So if there is clouds, I can tell you that we will know from the Michael Rood website whether or not it is Yom Teruah or not. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's very, 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 very rare. I can tell you right now, there's no way anybody saw a 1% crescent.
That's not true. We have seen a 1%.
No, you've seen a 2%.
Oh,
maybe.
Maybe that's
And actually, I think it was a 3%. Anyways, point being is because we have seen the new moon on a different day than what the what Rood's calendar said, and we made a decision to probably go ahead and honor that on that day. And there was a lot of confusion and a number of other things that happened, but short version is that we usually try to go by the sighting of the moon. So we'll be looking for the moon on Tuesday night, right? On Tuesday evening, as the sun sets, we'll be looking for that first visible crescent. And of course, for those of you who are actually in the congregation of After's Heart Ministries, we will go ahead and send that out via Slack to you guys. Okay. All right. Any last questions? Any last comments, thoughts?
Oh, there does need to be a second witness of the sighting of the new moon.
Oh, I agree.
So
There
if
does.
you see it before us, you tell us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Usually, according to tradition, and this is Karaite tradition, actually, this isn't rabbinical tradition. According to Karaite tradition, a person of authority has to declare it, and then another person of authority has to bear witness of it. So it would basically be me and some other rabbi, or me and some other person. And so obviously we look for somebody else in authority in the congregation to confirm it, and that's most of the time usually Alan, because he of course is on the board of directors. Okay, so any other thoughts, questions, comments? Okay, I see that no one is unmuting themselves to speak, and so I'm going to go ahead and we will end the YouTube broadcast. This is Rabbi Q and Deborah with After's Heart Ministries, and we have been midrashing Yom Teruah. At any rate, we'll see you for the midrash on Yom Kippur. Shalom, shalom.